Welcome everybody to the September Planning Commission meeting. We're going to call it to order. First order of business is to review and approve the minutes from the August meeting. Do we have any questions in regards to those minutes at all? Commissioners?
I make a motion that we approve the minutes from the August 27 meeting.
Okay. Commissioner Hatley and Commissioner Hubbard? We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from the August meeting. All those in favor acknowledge by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carried. Okay. Item number 2, we have a request to vacate a portion of South Utah Avenue, West 3rd Court, West 4th Street, being between blocks 18, 19, Madison White Edition of the City of Russellville. Mr. Walden?
Yes, so this is in the 300 and 400 block of South Utah Avenue. It's an alley, a street vacation. If this looks somewhat familiar, it's because last month you heard a request to vacate the portion of the alley that is directly connecting to this, sort of the T that's just west of there, and reviewing that. So the facts of the case are same. It's a single-family residence property. It's also vacant adjacent to it. And then it's also vacant to the south as well. It's R1 zoning, and on the land use plan, it is single-family residential, 4 to 8 units per acre. This is approximately a 50-foot strip of right-of-way, 50 feet wide, between the 3rd and 4th blocks of West 3rd Court and West 4th Street. The right-of-way is not currently used as a means of transportation. It is not improved. It's just a sort of a grassy area. This section of Utah Avenue could connect to a paved portion of Utah Avenue that's to the north on the 3rd Court side. But if you look, that goes further to the south, any future route of Utah Avenue going further south would be blocked. And so in a lot of ways, whether the terminus is at 3rd Street or 4th Street, there's not a great deal of benefit between differentiating between either of those, because it's not going to be a through street regardless. If kept, the block would be of a length that's not recommended by the subdivision code. The subdivision code generally recommends that block lengths be between 400 feet and 1,200 feet in length. So this would be somewhere around less than 250 feet in length. There are utilities that exist in the alley, and the applicant has not proposed to relocate any of the utilities. We've heard back from some of them. Most notably, there's significant city corp utilities in there that would have to be provided either an easement or something of that type. So the recommendation for action is approval with conditions. The first being that all utilities would be relocated at the cost of the applicant, or the applicant provide necessary easements to preclude the need to relocate utilities prior to city council approval. So.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions, or is there, this is a public hearing, so if anyone has any comment or any questions, feel free to step up to the mic. Ray, do you have anything to add on that, or that pretty much cover it?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, state your name for the record, please.
Cindy Walker. I manage the property there at 320 South Utah. It's been vacated since the 70s, never made a road. It's just kind of a mud hole, but we want to put a driveway in there for more parking off the street. And it goes to another dead end, so it's just left it.
All right. All right, commissioners, do I hear a motion?
Make a motion to pass.
Second.
Is that with the contingencies?
Yeah, you want to amend that?
Yeah,
With contingencies, as recommended? Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor acknowledge by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries.
Frank, was that you? Who was it? No.
Luke. Okay. Item number 3. We have a request to approve the Brookside Estates Phase 5 preliminary plat located South Seattle, submitted by Kirk Jones Engineering, on behalf of William Thornsberry.
Yes, so if you shift your frame of reference just to the east, it covers some land over there. These two applications are not connected. Staff thought, well, that's very suspicious that we have a alley closing that's right next to a platted, preliminary plat. Actually, they are not two unconnected cases. And so this is a preliminary plat request for 13 lots in an unconstructed portion of the Madison White Edition. Between Vancouver Avenue on the west, there's actually a small portion of Vancouver that's been constructed, and Seattle Avenue that's on the east. So these would be approximately 13 lots. Prior to your meeting, the Board of Adjustment approved a special exception for lots 11, 12, and 13 from the lot size requirements, an 8% reduction to allow lots to be about 8,800 square feet instead of the required 9,600 square feet. They'll still maintain the same lot width, but they'll have about 10 feet each less in lot depth. Some of our comments were requesting the indication of plans for sidewalks along 4th Street and Seattle. That was addressed. We asked the applicant to make a waiver request pertaining to improvement of the small portion of Tulsa Avenue that is adjacent to lot 11 there. That the applicant didn't show those improvements there, and so we said if that's your request, then that you need to request a waiver. So that waiver has been requested in writing. So if you make a motion, that you need to include that waiver if you approve the waiver. Provide a note that indicates allowed uses for all easements, which that's for utilities and drainage. That was addressed. We asked for a typical section of the street improvements. That was addressed. And then some details with the surveying accuracy certificate, other certificates. We had asked for a bill of assurance because there's no improvements that will be maintained by a neighborhood or something along those lines. The applicant's not proposing for a bill of assurance, so that's listed as a contingency, but that's actually not something that we need, and so that comment you can lay to the side. There is a small portion, if you look at lots 1 and 2 that lie in the floodplain, that will have to be addressed in the construction process for houses. And so one of the things that we asked was that the minimum finished floor elevation for those 2 lots be provided so that when a developer buys those lots, that they know what the house is going to have to be built up to qualify for a letter of map revision in those locations. So all of our comments really have been addressed. We do have one contingency as it pertains to plans with Citicorp, which is in line normally with the way that these preliminary plats are usually handled. Typically, the developer will bring in a set of preliminary plans and then ask for approval upon contingency of the construction plan. So the utilities, drainage, those things. The applicant has pretty much all of that together because this was already a approved preliminary plat several years back in this location. But there are some small details that have to be worked out with Citicorp pertaining to the provision of water service. So that recommendation for action on this is approval with contingencies. And that contingency is finalize approval of construction plans with Citicorp and the city engineer. And this would, if approved, would need to be approved with the request for the waiver as well.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have any questions? Any comment? Anybody from the public? All right. Do I hear a motion on this? Anybody?
Make a motion, pass it with contingencies.
Okay. We have a motion. Do I hear a second? Does anybody have any questions for James as you're looking it over? Kurt, do you have anything to add to this? We do have a motion on the floor, so I mean.
I don't have anything to add, but I am available if you have any questions.
Okay. All right. Well, we do have a motion. Do I hear a second?
So I understand that this is going to be subject to contingencies, and then then it will come back
Yes.
to do that?
Yeah, contingencies. Yeah, clarify that, James, if you would. Those.
So, yeah, the contingency is for final approval with the city engineer pertaining to the utility design. Essentially, that Kurt has to make sure that Citicorp is taken care of with the water line issue. There's some back and forth pertaining to, does it need to be looped, does it not need to be looped, and making sure that the issues that Citicorp have are resolved and okay prior to commencing construction, essentially. So we typically put in there a contingency when we do a contingency with construction plans, is that approval of the city engineer of the construction plan. So, but by and large, everything has already been designed, and so it's that remaining issue of whether the lines are looped or not looped with Citicorp.
Do we see any issues from Citicorp on that? Okay.
No, we just got to answer some internal questions there about the way we're going to have to require to put in.
But you're not foreseeing any problems with that? Okay.
Yeah. Typically, at the planning commission level, if it's something that's going to affect where lots are, platted lot lines, building lines, those things, that's something that staff would not be comfortable handling with the contingency. When it gets down to the technical details of where's the water line going to be, or something along those lines, that me as a city planner, it's beyond my level of expertise, and unless anybody has a PE, it's beyond their level of expertise as well.
Okay.
The water line.
State your name for the record, Kurt, if you will.
Kurt Jones. The water line issue is simply whether or not there's existing water lines on Seattle, both north and south of the proposed tie-in of 4th Street. And we're actually right now showing it being looped to the north and tying into that system. I think City Corporation, Jim can correct me if I'm wrong, is just trying to make an internal decision whether they want it looped to the north or back to the south. And we've agreed to do, show whichever way they want it looped at this point. But, until we get an answer from them, we can't finalize those plans. But it doesn't, as James pointed out, it doesn't in any way affect the configuration of the lots or the number of lots or anything else in the design on the system.
So it shouldn't change anything on
It
the
won't
planning
change
commission level
anything.
now? Okay. Does that clarify?
I have a question. Now, keeping in mind that we were just handed this afternoon on this letter. There seems to be, in this letter at least, a question of who's going to pay for the water line loop. Has that been resolved?
That has not been resolved either, but that's
Well,
something that we'll work out with City Corporation. I mean, it's going to be, we know the line's going to be looped. We're requesting through City Corporation that we not have to pay for that looping itself, but I mean, that's between us and them at this point.
James, the fact that we run it through the city engineer, does that cover us on all utilities?
Yes, I mean, that's
That's what we're talking about,
The
isn't it?
city engineer's
So we're
job-
covered on all utilities?
Yeah, the city
doing it
engineer's
that
job
way.
and role is to do sort of a third-party check of the other engineer's work. And so they're reviewing drainage, they're reviewing utility design. So when we lay out that sort of baseline contingency that the city engineer approve it, what we're saying is, do all the calculations check out, do all of those things check out?
And the city engineer, would he be the one or she be the one to make that determination as to who's going to pay? Who did,
Yes, so there would be coordination with the city engineer, with City Corp, and Kurt on all of those issues. So, I mean, this is a very, very standard
okay,
contingency.
I'm good with it.
Any other questions? Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Shirley? Yep. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of this acknowledge by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carried. Okay. Mr. Walden, if you would, kind of guide us through item number 4 here, if you would.
Yes, so we've been working on some zoning code updates over time. There's 2 of them that are currently up at the council for consideration. I don't really have a lot new to bring to you tonight. There will be at 6:15 following this meeting, a meeting on sort of short-term rentals to have some ongoing discussion, public meeting following a meeting that was held, sort of an impromptu meeting that was held probably about a month ago or so. And so we'll be discussing at that. So that's really the only update that I have at this
Okay.
point.
So those proposed changes would be best discussed during that, I guess?
Yes,
Any suggestions
yes.
or whatever? Okay. All right. Commissioners, with your indulgence there, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the September Planning Commission meeting here, and if we would reconvene back here at 6:15 for the public discussion of the on the code changes. Any objections? All right, we are adjourned. discuss the short-term rental changes or any future additions or subtractions we need to make from the current regulations that we have. We are going to start this. We're not keeping minutes on this. We are going to limit the time, for discussion. I mean, as far as, we're not going to be here all night, but I would like to start, go ahead and let James come up here and open it up with what he has so far.
All right. Well, for everyone, I think a lot of the faces here are familiar from a meeting last month. Kind of give you some background on how we got here and where we're going with this. Is that we had some regulations that were proposed. There seemed to be a lot of concern about those regulations in terms of their impact, and so at I think a recent special called council meeting, we came up here and had some discussion, kind of took a breather to see what concerns were, where we were regarding that. And so I said at the conclusion of that meeting that we would have another public meeting where I would get sort of a draft of something together that may be for some level of discussion, and then kind of see where we go from there in terms of drafting regulations. So what you all have, if you didn't grab a copy out in the hallway, is essentially just a discussion draft, some ideas to look at, think at, in terms of looking at this. And so what I thought I would do is kind of go through this particular draft and talk about what it regulates and what it doesn't regulate. And in some discussion with our city attorney, we've kind of mulled over this issue of when short-term rental starts, when short-term rental stops, how do we deal with boarding housing, lodging houses, how do we deal with the definition of family, because if we're going to create a zoning that says we allow single-family dwelling units, then we have to define what a family is, and that gets into a lot of complications in terms of thinking about when we define a family. Is it just related individuals that are living in a house, or do we also have to permit unrelated individuals that are living in a house, occupying as a housekeeping unit? And if we regulate it in a certain way to deal with something, are we then going to have an unintended consequence of restricting something else? So if we're going to do something that restricts, 4 unrelated individuals under one lease in one house, then what happens when we're looking at 4 tech students in a house? How are those two things different? And that's one of the things that's very difficult when you deal with the issue of zoning, is that everything that you have, every law that you pass has to have equal application. So when we pass a rule, it's got to apply to everyone uniformly in the way that applies. We can't apply it to one individual in one way and apply it to another individual in another way in terms of looking at that. So it creates some sort of difficult things in doing that. So where we're at currently with this draft is dealing just with the issue of short-term rentals. And so short-term rentals would be rentals that are 30 days or less. There's nothing that this regulates that deals with any rental term that is longer than that. So there's nothing within the scope of what this deals with that deals with 90 days, 120 days, anything along those lines. It just deals with something that's being occupied for a term of 30 days or less. And it sort of establishes some different types of short-term rental and different forms of rental or lodging or housing. The first being a minor short-term rental. A minor short-term rental would be 2 rooms, up to 2 rooms in one dwelling where the individual resides there. So what I'm saying is the owner of the owner or the occupant of the main occupant is someone that lives there on premises, maintains full premises. So you could do up to 2, and that would be considered a minor short-term rental. Then you get up to a major short-term rental, which could involve full rental of a dwelling with the occupant living there on premises or not having the main occupant living there on premises, the owner not living there or not living there. And that could allow up to 5 dwelling rooms, and that would be considered a major short-term rental. So, I'm sorry, 5 sleeping rooms is what that would be. The next level up from that would be a bed and breakfast, where you would have the owner that may live there, may not live there, doesn't necessarily have to provide food service, and that goes up to 7 sleeping rooms. And then anything beyond that then becomes a hotel, is the way that this is defined. Now, there's a small tweak of what the definition of family is. Currently, the way that family is defined in the code is one or more persons related by blood, marriage, or adoption, or a group of no more than 8 unrelated persons not related by blood or marriage. And so that's how that's currently defined, operating as a single nonprofit housekeeping unit. Now, one of the issues that we get into with the way that that's constructed is that, well, what do we mean by a nonprofit housekeeping unit? When does that begin? When does that stop? Is that at 1 week? Is that at 2 weeks? Is that at 3 months? Is that at, where does that begin and end in terms of how we define that? And so the way that this definition would deal with that is that it would be considered a family if it's occupying the premises for a period of greater than 30 days, is essentially the way that this is laid out. So there's certain regulations that apply to short-term rentals that go with this. The first being that there would be a requirement to obtain a what we call a short-term rental license. Short-term rental license would not be a business license. It would be something different than that. It would just be a license that grants you the authority to operate a short-term rental. The fee would be $50, and there would be an annual renewal that's required with it. Some of the requirements that go with that are requirement to provide insurance. Insurance is either a vacation rental or a short-term rental. There are policies that are available for that. One of the reasons behind that potential regulation is that there are these horror stories of people going into a house and touching a mirror and the mirror breaking, and they get all lacerated, and they have to go to the hospital, and then they find out that that where they were renting, there wasn't really any insurance that the individual had that would end up covering them. And so you hear the horror stories like that. The second would be an inspection for compliance with the fire code. So as part of this, we want to make sure that if it's being used where you've got turnover that's less than 30 days, it's being used in a way that's similar to maybe the way that a hotel might function, that it needs to have some compliance with fire code to make sure that there's not unsafe conditions in the home. And another would be a requirement for a local representative contact, someone that could respond within an hour to address complaints. So things like the neighbors over there being really loud, they're throwing a party, and have the local representative for the short-term rental come out and deal with it. Do something that addresses that particular issue. And if the way this is constructed, if the person, the property owner, doesn't keep an updated person on file or has a repeated number of complaints, that could be a basis for revocation of their ability to have a short-term rental. So if there's just complaint after complaint after complaint after complaint. Additionally, those are sort of the requirements that go with obtaining a license. The next would be that they would be required to collect and pay sales tax to the city of Russellville on the proceeds of the rental of the units. And then finally, or not finally, but and additionally, there would be a requirement for an information packet. In times that I've stayed in a short-term rental in locations, I received a really nice information packet that just basically told me what my responsibilities were as someone that was renting that unit. It told me how many people that we could have on the location. Are there noise restrictions that apply, and what are those noise restrictions? Where it was okay for me to park, where did I not need to park, so that I didn't create sort of an obstacle or issue for the neighbors? Where trash would have to be located, where did I dump the trash? If I had to take trash out to the street, where that would be put? Who I had as a local person that I could contact, and that both goes for if there's an issue. But let's say that a raccoon falls through the ceiling, or there's mice all through the house and something's wrong. Somebody that I can actually contact to deal with it. So it's both from a city perspective needing that, but also from the perspective of the potential renter. Potential evacuation routes, so if we're needing to get out of town, somebody's not familiar, and God forbid, we have some sort of issue, the best ways to get out. Renter's responsibility not to trespass on private property or create disturbances. And then finally, a notification that the renter could be charged with a violation if they do things that might violate their things that are contained in that information packet. On top of that, there would be a requirement for additional parking to be provided with this. Let's say that you're going to have 5 sleeping rooms. If it's a normal single-family dwelling and you've got 5 bedrooms, it's normal to provide 2 parking spaces. But the point at which it changes into a short-term rental and having 5 sleeping rooms, you have the potential to have 5 vehicles there. And so having some additional requirements for parking in those locations. And then finally, it's where all of these different types of units would be permitted and allowed. And so with a minor short-term rental would be permitted in every zone excluding industrial or heavy industrial or the conservation district. So it would be something that would be permitted by right. So an individual property owner could rent out up to 2 rooms for a short-term rental. They have to maintain permanent occupancy in that location, but they can rent out 2 rooms in their house. A major short-term rental would be permitted by right in a residential office zone, a R3 zone, an R4 zone, and then all of the commercial zones. It would be permitted by right. And then it would be a special permit in RE, R1, and R2. So R1 and R2, those are largely single-family residential districts. RE is a residential estate district. So there would be areas where it would be permitted by right, and then areas where it would be a special permit. Bed and breakfast would be something that if you got a special permit, that it would be allowed in the residential office district, and also the downtown district, the downtown buffer district, and then would be permitted in the other commercial districts. There's nothing that really proposing about that to change, where bed and breakfast is currently allowed and where it's not allowed. And the same as with hotel. If something operates as a hotel, then it would be in the commercial district located there. And to kind of provide some clarity, when I say permitted by right, that means that there is a vested right of an individual to operate that use. That means that they do have to comply with all of the requirements that are listed, but that's something that they're permitted by right to do. A special permit use is a little bit slightly different. The way that a special permit use operates is that an individual comes to the Planning Commission and applies. There's a public hearing on it, and then the Planning Commission and City Council can say, well, there's certain impacts that this use is going to have on the area, and so we're going to require that this condition be imposed, and they have to be reasonable conditions that pertain to the impact of the use. So if it's something that it's in a neighborhood and it's very tight, then it may require some additional fencing or may require some additional landscaping, things that would mitigate the potential impact of the use. So with that, that's really all I have. I can answer questions.
If you would, James, while you have the mic there, if you would clarify to everyone the process, if they have any recommendations, documentation, anything they want to present to the city, I mean, what's that process? I mean, how do they need to go about that?
So, yeah, in providing information through this, the best way would probably be to contact Laquita at Public Works, or you can come and get my email address from me, or get in contact with her. She'll get in contact with me, and we can have a discussion pertaining to that. I'm very open to making modifications. Again, this is just a discussion draft at this point. It's not something the Planning Commission at this point even necessarily considering taking up.
Okay. All right. Thank you, James. All right. Yes, that's, yeah.
I think everybody can hear me. I have a lot
Well, step up to the microphone and, if you would, just so everybody can hear.
Okay, I'll just stand with Question is going to be about family and this short-term rentals or even long-term rentals, short-term majors. Take a house and 5 guys work nuclear plants. And they travel around. Now, all these guys, one guy lives in Ohio, another guy lives in Tennessee. I mean, that's where his major house is. That's where he pays his income tax. That's where his wife and his children, his dog, and his hunting and fishing equipment. But these 5 guys come together for 2 months, rent a house in Russellville. They're over 30 days, so they don't serve as 30 days. But under this definition of family, that make them a family?
If they were doing that for 2 months now, I think they would be considered.
But what about their main family back in Texas and Ohio?
So the way that family is defined, it's not really about familial relationship. This is establishing who can occupy a premise and who can't. And so it's, based on being consistent with most every single other zoning definition that I've seen in the way that's defined. It typically says that you can have an unlimited number up to, I guess, how much you can have occupancy and structure of people that are related by some form of familial relationship, be that blood, marriage, adoption, guardianship. Yeah, it's.
But I think it's a stretch, though, to say that people that work together are family.
It's really not about familial relationship, it's about people that are occupying premises. So for instance, when I was in college, I had a roommate and we lived in an apartment. We weren't family by any blood means.
Did you consider yourself family? Would you have represented yourself to anyone as family?
No. But we were in a multi-family dwelling, occupying it as a nonprofit hospital.
So what if, okay, so I guess it's my turn to talk. Let me get the paper.
Does anybody else have any questions or any comments to bring up? Okay, just keep it brief, bless.
I gave all the people up here at the table some printouts, a bunch of research I've done. I'm not going to go through all of that. I'm going to go back to hold it back to. I'm concerned about changing this definition of family from what it currently says in the zoning code as opposed to what we've watered it down. The existing code is, and proposal is, one or more individuals related by blood or marriage, including adopted children, adoption, guardianship, may be defined as a group not related by blood or marriage. So we've already got that. Not to exceed 8 people. Already got that. but it goes on to say, as distinguished from a group including occupying a boarding house or lodging house, a hotel, a club, or similar dwelling for group use. What's the, what was the object of watering that down? I mean, we took out a lot of stuff about you distinguished from people that are living in boarding houses, hotels, clubs, hotels, group use. What?
The reason is that in researching that and going back to what was located there, we didn't have a definition for what a boarding house was. We didn't have a definition for what a lodging house was.
Boarding house is in the regulation. Current.
But it's not defined.
Oh, okay.
And so distinguishing it from something that we don't have a definition of, in which.
Okay, but why did we take out saying that distinguished from a group that's occupying a boarding house, lodging house, hotel, club, or other similar dwelling?
Because we put in there a term of 30 days or greater is what establishes it.
Okay. Well, that's just going to open it up a lot more. Because a lot of these people are going to be coming in here, they're going to stay more than 30 days. So that's not really the issue. And we already have a definition from the current zoning code that says a hotel is a building or part thereof occupied as more or less temporary abiding place for individuals in which the rooms are usually occupied singularly, could be two people in a room, for hire, in which the rooms have no provisions for cooking, which is going to be like a house, no provisions for cooking. The building usually has a kitchen, usually, not always, and a public dining room that's for the accommodation of the guests. Okay, so you got rooms that people rent. It has a kitchen, it has a dining room that the guests in the rooms can use. That is a hotel under the current zoning code.
Les, if I could interject
all right.
here. Okay,
All right, well,
I'm gonna,
all right, then briefly then, I'm just going to summarize it like this. I've read this thing. I've got 50, 60 hours of research into this. I've talked to Mr. Walden. If I say it's cold, he says it's hot. He's taken our existing codes and weakened them down. I'm not going to say that I'm any kind of an expert on this, but I've got 50, 60 hours of research into this. I have got court cases. I have got definitions all over the United States of what a family is, and they are not as limited as what he says they are.
referring back to what he said a while ago, though,
Yeah.
the proper procedure is to
Okay.
bring those to Public Works, to
Okay.
Laquita, and the.
So, but here's
that's
the
what needs to
problem.
be.
Everybody knows that I'm hot on this issue. The first time I heard about it was when I got here and got a copy of this. And now I'm stuck trying to mesh my research with what's been said.
This is just a
So,
public discussion.
okay.
No decisions are going to be made tonight.
Okay,
So-
here's where I'm at. Here's where I'm at. I'm tired of coming and being asked to jump over unicorns. So, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chairman, City Attorney, Mr. Waldron, you are hereby on notice. I will speak no further than this. I have consulted legal counsel. I will be happy to meet with you guys. You need to call me because this is going to court. I'm not going to come up here time after time and be pushed around with silliness. So I don't care what anybody else says. You need to be calling me and making an appointment because if you don't, then you're going to hear from an attorney. I'm willing to sit down. I've got tons and tons of research that contradicts what he's telling us.
We get that, okay.
Okay?
I appreciate
And
that,
I've
Mr.
given
Taft.
all of you guys copies of it.
Okay. Ma'am,
So call me
thank you.
unless you want to hear from an attorney.
Thank you, Les. All right, ma'am, your turn. Go ahead.
Some of the people in here will be familiar with me. I've been around for a while on a few issues.
Pull the microphone down there where we can hear you. There you go.
tried to get organized here, so I won't go on and on.
Hold on just one sec. Mr. Taft? Mr. Taft,
I mean,
Leslie.
I don't want to try to cause people to have to quit.
if we're going to
talking
have
or
an
whatever.
internal discussion, if we could take it out of the chambers, guys, if y'all could. Thank you.
So anyway, this short-term rental thing came to my attention primarily from reading in the newspaper, and then recently from reading in the local newspaper. I consider it to be a very complex issue unless people are willing to agree on quite a few words, which words don't seem to mean anything nowadays to a lot of people. Okay, so that's how I know about the issue. I wasn't aware of the document that Mr. Walden had put together. If I had been, I would have surely looked over it. But these are my remarks. I've lived in Russellville since...
Pull the microphone to you.
There you go.
Okay.
There.
Okay. I've lived in Russellville since 1966. I've lived in the, well, I moved here in 1954. I've used Glenwood all my life that I've been here. I've lived in the house that I'm in now since 1966. So I've been active in the community on different issues, and I'm kind of aware of how things work. So that's my background here. I'm addressing my remarks to y'all, to you all, to the City Council, and to the people who stand to gain economically from making these rentals. I'm hoping that they will be a little open-minded to not just their pocketbooks when they hear what I have to say. I think I mentioned I live in Western Hills subdivision, and so I am a frequent user of Glenwood. Glenwood is an old neighborhood. Even my neighborhood is old now. People that are realistic know that as the neighborhoods age, it becomes harder and harder to keep not a social group going, but a general familiarity that people have so that they care about each other a little bit. So I have been pretty active in using the city's code enforcement folks to address different issues that come up primarily along Glenwood and in my neighborhood over the years, and including trying to help physically take care of my neighborhood by seeing that the entryway gets mowed and litter picked up and all that kind of thing. But I know when it comes to code enforcement, the only verbiage that matters are the specifics that are in the document. If I come down here to talk about an issue and there's some kind of fluffy, nice language at the top of the document, that is not going to do you any good. So whatever gets written, if it's not specific, it will be very hard to enforce. It'll be hard to enforce anyway. And so I am really sort of opposed to this kind of thing, even though it's been going on for years quietly. But anyway, I'm not going to just speak totally. I'm not going to speak totally against it. I've had 2 bad experiences over the years in my neighborhood directly related to this kind of an issue. One of them resolved itself because thankfully they went away. The other one required some trips from the police and other unpleasant things. And I went over in my bathrobe one night about 12:30 to ask if they'd quieten down a little bit, that kind of thing. So what I'm really hoping is whatever we come up with will have enough specifics in it that it can give protection to people that are going to keep trying to have a neighborhood that has some kind of cohesiveness to it. And I don't know whether this will do it or not. Between this type of thing and our planned unit development things nowadays that we're doing, sometimes what the results from that have been rather positive. We're going to need to enlarge our code enforcement department because they're going to be really busy people trying to figure out if all of our codes are being adhered to. So I'm asking for some specifics, and the administration that will be necessary to keep up with all this.
Thank you. Okay.
I have two issues. One is, how in the world would you ever police it? Are we going to go from house to house and check the occupants to see who's spending the night there? We don't really know. And the other thing would be, all renters now have a number to call for any emergencies. I don't know why the city would be involved in any complaints anyway. Wouldn't they just call the owner? Now, recently I have two experiences trying to police something in a rental that I manage. First off, we deal with fair housing each and every day. And there's limitations to what we can ask of people and what we require of people. I'm wondering how this limitation will affect fair housing. That is a national law. I don't know if you've checked that or not, Mr. Warren. Have you looked at the fair housing laws to see if it coincides with that or not? I don't know.
Yeah, this doesn't actually, I mean, this just pertains to short-term rental. Anything that's over 30 days, the same.
Well, I like your 30-day limit. That's perfect. Because we hardly ever have a 30-day. No, that was a good addition. And another thing is that how are you going to prove if someone's related or not? Because you really can't unless you took blood samples, which is kind of silly to even think about, because how can you control who you have in your home unless you police it? And then what are we getting to? If we go around and police your home where you are supposed to have your privacy, you know, you may or may not be married to them. They're strangers to, you know. So I kind of liked his idea, if you live together for a portion of time, you're considered a family. We have a lot of students from Arkansas Tech that are not related, that are friends, usually from the same town, but they are not related. And I'm only here really for that concern, that I really don't want to do anything that causes us to be unable to supply housing for people that are trying to further their education. Because we're very pro-education, especially Arkansas Tech. We're all alumni. I mean, I am, my family is, and that's our concern. But I did think you made a great advance on what you were, it's got a lot of good to it, what you've done. I just have those additional questions.
Thank you. All right. That's a good question.
Yeah, so it is a relatively new area, and I would say that in terms of the research that I've done, there's some cities that have been attempted to be very, very, very restrictive on the issue. This, I would say, leans toward the less restrictive of the options that I've seen, frankly. Probably the area where this is on that line is the area of short-term, or the major short-term rentals requiring special permits in certain locations. That's probably an area that somewhere in that line between being restrictive and non-restrictive. But by and large, what this is really aimed at trying to do or trying to achieve is to allow for local people or someone that owns a home to be able to do that. And then for people that are renters to also, or people that own property and attempt to rent it on a short-term basis. So 30 days or less, basically as an Airbnb, VRBO, something along those lines, that we have some guidelines about how that essentially has to be done. And, you know, all of this is really completely negotiable in the way that it's structured. But in this draft, it really wasn't trying to be too onerous in terms. It was really about providing some protections to make sure that there's ways to mitigate the impact on the adjacent property, really, to be honest.
I don't have any, but I know if you ask younger people, younger than everybody here, no offense, but
Easy, buddy.
Well, yeah.
we can't stop progress. The whole nation's growing. I mean, Russellville's always slow to grow with everybody else. I'm not saying we have to do it, I'm just saying it's going to happen at some point.
Yeah, Airbnb is already here, and I mean I'm someone that has actually used it. Yeah. Yeah.
Especially with tech, parents getting watch kids play sports, and there's a lot of value. They know the big supporter of our community. It leaves, we're in trouble. So why would we make it hard for them all day?
So one of the things that has been a struggle as a result of this, in terms of looking at it, is that everything that revolves around that definition of family, when you it's almost operates a little bit like a balloon. When you push down in one area, then it squirms out from under you in another. So when we say we want to regulate, A&O workers occupying a house, then we have to apply that equally, and so that starts impacting folks that live as tech students. This is just for 30 days or less. This isn't for a 3-month arrangement or anything like that.
I think a lot of this stems from the fact that we talk about a single-family dwelling. It is defined by Realtor.com. Single-family home is a structure maintained and used as a single dwelling unit. It doesn't even talk about family, but it is a single-family dwelling. Okay?
So,
I think that's where everybody's hung up, that when you say a single-family dwelling, that only one family, that's a family, but it's a structure. Okay, it's got separate walls, that aren't in contact with another structure. It sits on its own unit, on its own property. That's a single family.
Certainly from a construction perspective, yes. But I would say from a zoning perspective, it's both. It's a form of construction, but there also is, in terms of, let's say that you build a single family unit and it's a 9,000 square foot house, and you have 15 people living in there, and you've got 2 totally unrelated families. At some point, that becomes something that's different than what a traditional single-family house is. And so, from the perspective of zoning, you have to regulate both the construction and also the occupancy. And it's a really fine line, a very difficult line, because from a legal standpoint, I am not an attorney, so I can't provide any legal advice. But when you're exercising these kinds of restrictions, there has to be a legitimate police power, legitimate reason why you're doing it. The means that you use to regulate it have to be reasonably related to what it is that you're trying to achieve. So you can't say we're going to do something and then go and do a lot of things that don't actually achieve the end result. And it can't be unduly burdensome to the affected people. And so the restrictions have to meet really those things to be a legitimate exercise of the city's zoning power in doing that.
Okay.
This is not.
Can I just ask, then what is the issues? Why
We-
Have we had major complaints about it? Is that why these are brought up? Because if there's not an issue, why are we making it an issue?
So the reason that I brought this up, and I think there's two different things that have happened. I think there's been concern with individual properties that has bubbled up as a result of totally independent from this. And then there was this, and the reason that I proposed these regulations is hearing about issues with, frankly, some horror stories of different things that have happened. And there's a lot of, no, not in Russellville specific. But the thing is that things that happen in other communities can happen here as well. And there's zoning issues that change all the time. There's things that are coming up, like dealing with Uber, dealing with things like what we call small cell wireless facilities, dealing with short-term occupancy, that these are really large emerging issues in planning that really, frankly, I was trying to take a proactive approach before it became a large issue.
Is the $50 fee, is that something across the board that you see for the having owners register? The annual fee, and is this per property?
That would be per property. And really, the purpose of having a fee is not so much to generate revenue off of it. The purpose of the taxes is to generate revenue off the taxes. But the fee is really to have something that is substantial enough that brings attention to it. I mean, it could be $25. It could be, but it's not really meant to be something that's revenue generating, but it's something that if you don't pay it, that there's something really there.
But if you're wanting to get people to let you know about it, because for $50, you've got all these property owners that have these short-term, they're not gonna let you know because they're not gonna pay that $50.
A $50 fee. And that brings up,
If you're trying to get people to come forward with it to register, that's not going, that's gonna be a constraint on us, I'm gonna tell you right now. They're not gonna
from
pay it. So
there,
you have people that are gonna be honest and pay it, and then ones that aren't. How are you gonna police that?
so it is admittedly a very difficult thing to police. The one thing that I think on the flip side of that, in looking at it, is that oftentimes with short-term rentals, those things are advertised. Now, the city does have a defined amount of code enforcement resources, and the city has to prioritize the way in which those things are done. And so typically what that means is the way that the city enforces its regulations is on a complaint basis. And so, more than likely, I'm not going to say that the city's not going to take a proactive approach in enforcing that, because it would be very easy to go on VRBO, Airbnb, and see units that are listed and go to that location, contact them and say you're in violation. But it's been my experience in working in numerous cities that the vast majority of regulations are enforced through the complaint process.
And is this what you've seen, this is a common fee that other Conway, or we're comparing ourselves to Conway, they charge this fee to do this?
I'm not sure what Conway's fee would be. Really, it was set to be something that was fairly low, and so yeah, just a common fee number.
Yes,
It could be. I mean, it could be lower. It could be $10. I mean, it could be $25. It's just something that there's monetary value associated with it.
But before, go ahead.
Just want to give an example for the lady that inquired about a problem, getting a head problem. And there's some old planning commission people here, maybe I'm remembering wrong, many years ago, before we had cell towers, our city planner at the time said, we need to know what the top is, we need to have ordinances related to where the tower can go, and, make this prepared. This was many years ago, and it
This was way back before he was born, right? Is that there? Okay, I'm sorry. The shop was there. I had to take it, bud. I'm speaking for every old person in here, okay? I'm joking. I'm joking. All right. Anybody else have any comment or any questions for James while he's at the microphone?
James, I don't see him in the audience tonight, but one of the property owners that I have spoken with on the phone and talked to, they often rent to like, we have 30 or 40 fishing tournaments a year that come into town, and these fishermen come into town and they rent these houses. And they share, and I think they're here for less than 30 days. How will this impact those people?
So that would probably be, if they're renting out a whole house, that would be something that would be a major short-term rental. And so the way that this is currently constructed, that there are certain zones where that would be permitted by right, and then zones like R1, that would be required to be permitted as a special permit use. So they'd have to get a special. I'm sorry?
They would pay the $50, or would they have to come before the planning?
They would have to come before the planning commission to do that.
I mean, how much you got more reason, I mean, me.
That's a big piece of revenue that we really don't need to, we need a different route. But something that would make it easier, that's a lot of revenue from the big bass, that's just one group that comes. I don't know the answer, but I would hate to see them, I know that there's probably a group of them that rent a house and get out of the hotel.
Right. That's what I do at conferences.
But with this, we're saying we don't want to, because we all know that if we provide and do the terms of number 3 in Russell, Arkansas, it's going to be very hard collecting up rent to offset that. Because if the fire department gets involved, and we have to put a sprinkler system in, which we probably will, they could run $20,000 to $40,000 on a project that we may not rent enough to ever get our money back just on that one item. So we have to be very careful on number 3 here, that we don't run a lot of our clientele off.
With the transient accommodation.
Number 3 is pretty tough. Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, on the second page.
I've got a few things to say, if I could.
Is there any more questions for James while he's at the mic before we?
I'm sorry, Chris, one more time. If we make this longer than 30-day rental, then none of this applies anyway, correct?
Correct. This is only dealing with 30 days or less.
Right, yeah.
With So kind of the way that the process works is this would end up being a code change. So right now we're having informal discussions. The point at which we feel comfortable with those informal discussions, then it would kind of be taken up by the planning commission. At that point, the planning commission could vote to hold a public hearing on that issue. So at that point, there would be some additional opportunity for review. The planning commission would vote it up or down, and if it's voted up, then it would go to the council. With the council, there would be additional review. So if this were set in at 30 days, and then later someone wanted to change it to 120 days, it would have to go through that same process. Anytime that there's a change of law like that, it just doesn't happen overnight.
I have one question for you. You said that you would have to go get a special permit.
Mm-hmm.
So that means if it's under 30 days and we're in that zone, we have to have a special permit, we've got to come to you and you decide if that residential area is all right to have a rental in. Is that what you're saying?
So essentially, the way that the special permit process happens, it wouldn't be for each time you want to do that. It would be to establish it as a major short-term rental. And so you would file an application the way that works, you'd file an application with Laquita. The public hearing would be set. It would be reviewed by staff. Staff would look at, okay, we see the context in which which the unit is located. We see that, okay, based on this, it's pretty far away from that property line, and so we're really not concerned about that, but maybe there might be, it might not have as much parking, and maybe we want you to do something that addresses this or that, or maybe we want to, it doesn't have a privacy fence on one side, and so there might be something relating to that. Those are kind of typical types of restrictions. Now, the Planning Commission the Planning Commission votes say, yes, this would be allowed, or no, this wouldn't be allowed. If they vote yes, that it is allowed, then they could also say that we might require a fence or landscaping, those types of things that would be reasonable conditions that could be imposed as part of that.
Okay, but you're saying that it is a public hearing, meaning everybody has a say in it. The public can come in and say, the neighbors can come in, just like we're having a problem now, and they don't want us there. Are you guys going to say, well, they don't want them there, we're gonna take that into an account, even though we're on 1.5 acres, our house is private, we have hedges, what I'm saying is, the neighbors are deciding they don't want rental there because they do not want a rental, not because it's a single family, husband, wife, and 2 kids, they don't even want that. They don't want a rental, period. So, you're gonna get, just like we heard a few minutes ago, the neighbors are complaining about it, and it's gonna influence you guys, which is gonna affect me, because I've already bought the house, I've already remodeled the house, and it's ready to rent for guys that's coming in for 2 or 3 months, or less, they could be less than a month, and there's 1,400 guys and girls coming in for the nuclear plant. There's not enough hotels. They're going to Clarksville, they're going to Morrilton, they're staying in trailer houses, they're staying in awful places and paying a lot of rent. Or they can stay in a brand new rental that I've just remodeled and completely redone, brought the property value up, and it is a nice place to be in. And now you're saying, my neighbor doesn't want me there, and because he's got influence somewhere, it is absolutely decided through you guys that it's not gonna happen. I just don't feel like that's the right way to handle it, because what's fair for me should be fair for everybody. What's unfair for me should be unfair for everybody. You can't pick and choose the neighborhood that you decide rentals can be in. Do you understand why I'm saying that? Because it's just saying, I don't know, it's just wrong that you can tell me I can't have a rental in this neighborhood and 2 streets over that one can.
Right.
Because my neighbor doesn't want one there.
Well, Chris Chris, did you have something?
Yeah, I have a few things that was
Oh.
just kind of, questions in my mind from reading, the outline.
Yeah, go ahead.
That I'd like to
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry that you guys are getting threatened and all that from somebody trying to bully. But I have some questions just in real life. I'm Chris Chronister, been a realtor here for over 35 years in Russellville. I sold these folks this house that they've spent tens of thousands of dollars to remodel, and they've made the property values increase, in my opinion, by the investment that they've made there. They bought a nice home in a nice neighborhood so that they could command a higher rate of rent. They want a higher clientele. But some questions that I had about this outline right here on the definitions of bed and breakfast. If y'all follow me on this right here, I don't is that a short-term rental, the bed and breakfast?
It's not, it would be considered, I mean, I guess if you wanted to consider it a former short-term rental, but a bed and breakfast would be, essentially the difference between a major short-term rental and a bed and breakfast is that a major short-term rental has up to 5 sleeping rooms, bed and breakfast has up to 7 sleeping rooms.
This says contains no more than 7. So a major short-term rental would contain no more than 7.
No, a major short-term rental would be up to 5.
But the bed and breakfast says no more than 7. So 5 would be no more than 7. It's the same thing. Your semantics, you know, I mean.
If you wanted to be treated as a bed and breakfast and have 4, you could.
And it wouldn't be a short-term rental.
And it wouldn't be a short-term.
So it's whatever you call it.
Essentially, I think the majority of people would want to be treated as a major short-term rental. And then if you go above that threshold, you get above the 5-bedroom threshold, then it enters into a bed and breakfast.
Okay, well, I was just reading your definitions. It says a dwelling unit that contains no more than 7 guest rooms is a bed and breakfast. So if it contains 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's less than 7. So it, would be a bed and breakfast too, if you wanted to call it that. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it seems like some of this is being written to target a certain type property in Russellville. I think that's getting on dangerous ground. I think it's also getting on real dangerous ground, you guys, when you start spot zoning, when you start talking about, well, I'm going to approve this one, which is a single-family unit, single-family home in a single-family neighborhood being rented to a single family. And you're saying, because of the term that you rent it, we're not going to allow it. That's getting real gray right there, guys. But, something else that I'm seeing in this thing is affecting my business and the business of 175 realtors here in Russellville is the short-term rental thing. We have all the time where a seller, just a real life situation, where we have a seller that would say, hey, I want to sell this property. We sell it, but I need 30 days to get out. Okay, now he's in a major short-term rental. So, I mean, where's that going to come into play?
I think there could be an exemption that would be added.
But these are just things that come into my mind just right off the cuff, We have people all the time that come to town with the nuclear plant, with industry here all the time that say, hey, I don't want to sign a lease. I'm looking for a home. I just want something on a month-to-month basis until I find something. So, they don't have a lease, or it's a friend, or it's a relative, or whatever. There's just a lot of restrictions here that are being made on properties and a lot of hardships, it seems like to me, for property owners that were creating problems to an issue we don't really have a problem. And I don't see why we're doing that, because we've got just a few people that are screaming about what could happen, what might happen, we can live our lives in fear all the time, but I don't think that's the way the Lord wants us to live our lives. And to create problems that aren't even there, I just don't see us doing that. But there's a lot of just real life situations that are going to affect a lot of people. I mean, we've got, somebody had told me like 20 or 30 verbos going on in Russellville right now. That's a lot of income for folks, that's being poured back into the community and stuff. So, I'd hate for that to be shut down. And these people are paying like, $1,200, $1,500, $2,000 a month. It's people that are coming in for weddings, for funerals, for family reunions, you know, all different sorts of things. For parents that are coming in to get their kids going in college, I mean, we see all kinds of short-term rentals. It's not just nuclear plant people. Anyway, those are just some things that I saw here. I don't know if there were some other things I took notes of. On number 3 there, on page, I don't say there's a page number, but on number 3, it talks about the short-term rentals being canceled because of a number of complaints. I mean, you could have somebody that's unhappy with a short-term rental that's going to make complaints all the time. I mean, they don't mow the grass low enough. You know, the house needs to be painted. These people are coming in too late at night and slamming the door. You know, I mean, and who are these people complaining to? And you know, you're going to cancel their short-term rental because a neighbor takes it on themselves just to go ahead and complain every time they get a chance. So those are just some things I was just seeing here. Also, you know, we've got, the tenants do have the right for quiet enjoyment, and I don't know if you start putting a lot of restrictions on the tenants, how much, you know, their rights are going to be violated too, you know, so a lot of thought needs to be going into this before y'all just jump on something.
That's why we're here, Chris.
I know.
All right, thank you very much. Guys, we're going to take 1 or 2 more, and then we're going to, yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. We sure appreciate that. And it's nice to hear from folks that have been here a while, that have seen the changes over the years. And that's why we're here, folks. It's a public hearing. It's a public meeting. It's not even a hearing. It's just a meeting of you know, we're all residents of Russellville. We all live here. The commission lives here. You guys live here. And we're all just trying to, and that's why we're all getting together here, just to hear all the ideas from all different points of view. I think it's very important, though, that you know, and I'm not gonna stay on it long, but to prevent any heartburn or whatever, if we do go through the proper channels, as far as, you know, if you do have issues, if you do have recommendations, you know, this is something we're trying to be proactive on, and if you could present those to the city in a proper manner, whether it be go through Laquita at Public Works, or if you want to contact, you know, James on, you know, he'll give you his email address after the meeting, and if you would just go through those proper channels that way. I can speak on behalf of the commission. I've told everybody up here, if something gets handed to me on the night of a meeting, it will not be voted on that night. I mean, it'll get tabled. I'll table it every time. If you bring something up here and hand it to us the day of the meeting, I mean, it's, you know, there are exceptions, you know. I mean, if it's something that has come up here that we've discussed before, or if it's, you know, I mean, but something like this, this is something that we're we're kind of having to reinvent the wheel here, if you would. But anyway, we do appreciate everybody coming tonight. And if you do have any comments, any questions at all, please address those you're welcome to contact your City Hall or Laquita at Public Works at any time, okay? All right. Thank y'all for coming.
Still, we're gonna have the same thing on long-term rental? We're gonna have